When a cold-hearted billionaire forces his maid's 8-year-old son to play the violin at a dinner, just to humiliate him, no one expects what happens next. The child lifts his bow, and the music that fills the hall exposes cruelty, awakens hearts, and changes lives forever. A story of pride, genius, and redemption that will move you to tears. Watch till the end to see how one performance silences a room and restores a family's honor. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment your country, and subscribe for more powerful, life-changing stories. The rain fell in steady rhythm against the towering glass windows of the Thornton mansion, a soft percussion that seemed to mock the silence inside. Each drop traced its own uncertain path down the cold panes, merging, separating, dancing across reflections of chandeliers that gleamed even in the gray morning light. 8-year-old Noah stood by the service entrance, small hands pressed against the glass, watching the ripples chase one another down until they vanished into the stone path below. The world inside was all marble, mirrors, and rules. The world outside, where he belonged, was mud and rain and freedom. "Stay close to me, sweetheart," his mother whispered, tugging gently at his sleeve as she adjusted her faded apron. The apron looked painfully out of place here, against walls painted in soft ivory, floors polished so perfectly they reflected the ceiling. "Mrs. Patterson called in sick, and I couldn't find anyone to watch you. Just stay quiet, all right? Do exactly as I say." Her voice trembled slightly, not from fear of her employer, but from exhaustion that never quite left her. She had been working 3 jobs since Noah's father died. Today was supposed to be a simple shift, but simplicity never lived in houses like this. Noah nodded, his dark curls damp with the mist that had followed them in. Everything inside smelled expensive: the lemon polish on the banister, the faint perfume of lilies arranged in vases taller than he was. He tried not to stare, but his eyes betrayed him. Every corner held something marvelous and untouchable. Paintings of men who looked stern and important watched him from the walls as if guarding their golden world from little boys like him. Eliza hurried toward the kitchen, her footsteps careful on the polished floor. Noah trailed behind, his sneakers squeaking faintly, earning a frown from the butler who passed them. The mansion felt alive with quiet menace, its hallways stretching into infinity, each door hiding a story he wasn't supposed to know. When his mother disappeared behind the kitchen door, Noah hesitated. That's when he saw it. A door slightly ajar down the corridor, light spilling out like a secret. Curiosity was stronger than fear. He inched closer, drawn by something soft and glimmering inside. The room was a study, walls lined with books and a single grand desk near the window. And there, resting on an elegant stand, was a violin. Its surface shone like honey, strings whispering under the glow of the morning light. It was beautiful in a way that hurt. Noah's heart thumped. His grandfather's old violin at home was held together with tape, its bow frayed, but this one seemed alive. He reached out, fingertips trembling, barely grazing the strings. A single note hummed faintly in the air, warm, delicate, and perfect. "What are you doing in my study?" The voice was sharp enough to freeze his breath. Noah spun around, heart pounding. In the doorway stood a tall man in a charcoal suit, his presence filling the room like a storm cloud. Maxwell Thornton. Even his name carried weight. His eyes were gray, cold, and curious in the way a predator might look at something unexpected. I was just looking," Noah stammered. Maxwell stepped forward, the polished soles of his shoes whispering against the rug. "Just looking," he repeated slowly, his tone smooth but edged with something cruel. "Do you have any idea how much that instrument cost, boy? More than your mother makes in 5 years. Noah shrank back, but the man's gaze pinned him where he stood. The faintest smirk touched Maxwell's lips. "Tell me," he said after a pause, circling him like a cat with a mouse. "Can you play?" "A little," Noah whispered, regretting it instantly. The billionaire's smile widened. "Perfect," he murmured half to himself, already imagining something cruel and entertaining. "Absolutely perfect." As Maxwell turned away, his reflection caught in the rain-blurred window. The boy stood alone in the echoing silence of the study, unaware that those 2 words had just set the stage for a night that would change all their lives forever. The rain had slowed by afternoon, leaving the mansion wrapped in a hush so heavy that even footsteps seemed afraid to break it. In the grand kitchen, the scent of roasted garlic and thyme hung thick in the air. Silver trays gleamed beneath bright lights, and the ticking of the wall clock sounded like a countdown. Eliza moved between counters with frantic precision, her fingers trembling as she arranged delicate pastries and polished crystal goblets. Every move carried the invisible weight of Maxwell Thornton's expectations, and the faint echo of his earlier command still pulsed through her chest like a warning. She'd spent years working here, slipping in and out of the background like a shadow. She knew the mansion's moods, the way silence grew before Maxwell entered a room, the way servants stood straighter, the way conversation died. But never before had his attention been fixed so sharply on her, or on her son. Noah sat on a stool near the pantry, swinging his legs nervously, watching his mother fight the storm inside her. He wanted to tell her it was okay, that the man in the study hadn't scared him, but his throat felt tight. The air seemed thinner in this place, like even breathing too loudly might offend the walls. When Maxwell's voice finally broke the quiet, it struck like lightning. Eliza, the single word froze her. She turned slowly, forcing a polite smile. Yes, Mr. Thornton? Maxwell stood in the doorway, hands tucked in his pockets, his expression unreadable except for the faint gleam of amusement in his eyes. His posture was casual, but everything about him radiated control, the kind that could crush someone without ever raising a voice. I've been thinking, he said, stepping further into the room. His gaze drifted to Noah. About our little situation this morning. Eliza's heart lurched. Sir, I'm deeply sorry. He wandered off while I was preparing the dining room. It won't happen again. Oh, I'm sure it won't, he replied, his tone dripping with mock reassurance. In fact, I've come up with a perfect solution. He paused, savoring the unease that rippled through the room. Tonight's dinner guests expect something memorable, a touch of entertainment perhaps. I think your boy will do nicely. The words hung there, cold and impossible. Eliza blinked. I beg your pardon? Maxwell's smile sharpened. You said he plays the violin, didn't you? Excellent. Tonight he'll perform for my guests. A little cultural enrichment, as they say. Eliza's pulse thundered in her ears. Mr. Thornton, please. Noah's only 8. He's never performed for anyone before, certainly not. Maxwell's expression hardened. Can he play or not? He's learning, she said softly. But he's just a child. Then it'll be adorable, he replied. 8 o'clock sharp. In the main dining room. And do try to make sure he's presentable. The tone left no space for protest, but Eliza tried anyway. Sir, please, he'll be frightened. This isn't fair. Maxwell stepped closer, and suddenly the warmth drained from the room. Do you know what's not fair, Eliza? His voice dropped, low and deliberate. Bringing your child into my home without permission. Letting him touch things worth more than your yearly wage. Tell me, should I simply fire you now? The blood drained from her face. No, sir. Please, Then we have an understanding. He straightened his cufflinks, his smile returning, brittle and thin. He performs tonight. Or you can collect your final paycheck and be gone before the hour is out. He left her standing there, trembling, while the ticking clock filled the silence he'd left behind. Noah slid off the stool and moved to her side. Mama, he whispered. It's okay. I can do it. Eliza turned to him, her eyes wide with disbelief and grief. No, sweetheart, you don't understand. He's not asking because he cares. He wants to make you look small. He wants them to laugh. Noah looked down, his small fingers twisting the hem of his shirt. I don't care if they laugh, he said quietly. I just don't want you to lose your job. Tears blurred her vision, but she blinked them away, unwilling to let them fall where others might see. She cupped his face, her thumb tracing the curve of his cheek. You shouldn't have to fix grown men's cruelty, she whispered. He looked up at her then, his eyes steady in a way that reminded her painfully of his father. Grandpa used to say music's like truth, Mama. It always finds its way. Eliza's breath caught, the ache in her chest deepening. From the far end of the hall came the faint sound of Maxwell's footsteps retreating, measured, certain, final. Outside, thunder rumbled again, distant but steady, as if the sky itself had taken a side. In the heart of that mansion, under chandeliers worth more than their lives, a decision had been made. Tonight a child would play not for applause but for survival. And in Maxwell Thornton's world of wealth and arrogance, he had no idea that the boy he meant to humiliate would soon rewrite the story of every soul in that room. The library was the quietest room in the mansion, but to Noah it felt like a place where sound itself had forgotten how to breathe. He sat curled up in the corner between 2 towering shelves, knees pulled tight against his chest. The hem of his shirt damp where he'd wiped his face, The scent of old paper and polished oak filled the air, warm and heavy, like time pressing down on him. Outside, faint laughter drifted from distant rooms, servants moving briskly to prepare for the evening ahead. But here the world was still, hushed, waiting. Noah had never felt smaller. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the billionaire's sharp grin, heard his mother's cracking voice, the trembling in her hands. He tried to tell himself it was just music, just a few notes, but the truth was colder than that. This wasn't about music, it was about power. And he was too young to fight power. He hugged his knees tighter, trying to stop the shaking in his hands. "You look like a boy who's seen a ghost," a gentle voice said from behind him. Noah flinched and turned. A tall man stood near the doorway, his silver hair catching the dim light. He wore a dark chauffeur's uniform, crisp but well-worn, and though his back was slightly bent with age, his posture carried quiet dignity. His face was lined, but his eyes, kind, steady eyes, watched Noah with the sort of concern that didn't need words. "I'm sorry," Noah whispered. "I shouldn't be here." "Neither should I, if we're being honest," the man said, stepping into the room. "But sometimes the best conversations happen in the wrong places." He lowered himself into a leather chair across from Noah, the fabric creaking softly. "I'm Victor," he said after a pause. "I drive for Mr. Thornton, and you must be Eliza's boy." Noah nodded slowly, unsure if he was in more trouble. "I'm Noah." "Good name," Victor said with a faint smile. "Strong name. You know, I heard what happened earlier. Maxwell's got a cruel streak, that one. Likes to remind people where they stand." "What did he ask you to do?" Noah's voice barely rose above a whisper. "He wants me to play the violin at dinner. For all his guests." Victor's smile faded. "Ah, so that's his new trick." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "And how do you feel about that?" "I don't know," Noah admitted. "I want to help Mama, but he wants me to fail. He wants them to laugh." The chauffeur studied him for a long moment, then nodded as if reaching a decision. "Tell me, Noah," he said softly. "Can you really play?" Noah hesitated, glancing down at his hands. "A little. My grandfather taught me some things before he got sick. I've been practicing by myself." "What was your grandfather's name?" "Samuel Carter," Noah said quietly. "Mama called him the Shadow when she told stories about him. She said he used to play in little jazz clubs when he was young." Victor froze. His fingers gripped the armrest and a flicker of recognition crossed his face. "Samuel Carter," he repeated, voice trembling slightly. "Dear God." He sat back, eyes distant as if seeing ghosts of another time. "I've heard that name. Everyone in the old music circles did. They said he could make a violin sing like no one else." Noah's eyes widened. "You knew about him?" "Knew of him," Victor corrected softly. "The Shadow, they called him. Because he'd play behind curtains when clubs wouldn't let him on stage. The world wasn't kind to men like your grandfather. But those who heard him never forgot. I never imagined." His voice trailed off as he looked back at the boy, wonder softening his features. "So his blood runs in you." Noah didn't know what to say. The library felt charged suddenly, as if something sacred had entered it. Victor leaned closer, his voice lowering to a whisper. "Noah, I wasn't always a driver. I used to teach at the Westfield Academy of Music. Before it closed, I trained some of the finest violinists in the state. Maxwell hired me when I lost everything, maybe because he enjoys seeing fallen men drive him around." His smile was tired, but not bitter. "But you might be something rare, something that can't be broken." Noah's throat tightened. "I don't know if I can do this." "They're going to laugh." "They might," Victor said gently. "But they won't when they hear the truth." "What truth?" "That music doesn't belong to rich men or polished rooms or gold-plated instruments. It belongs to anyone brave enough to play it." He reached out a weathered hand. "Come on, son. Let's show them what courage sounds like." Noah hesitated only a second before taking his hand. The warmth in Victor's grip was steady and real, like the first solid thing he'd felt all day. Together they walked out of the silent library toward a forgotten wing of the mansion, where dust and memory waited. The rain had stopped now, and though thunder still rumbled faintly in the distance, it no longer sounded like fear. It sounded like a beginning. The air in the east wing of the mansion was different, older, heavier, filled with the scent of dust and silence. Victor led Noah through a narrow corridor lined with fading portraits, their painted eyes watching as if aware of something momentous about to unfold. At the end of the hall stood a double door, its brass handles dull from disuse. The chauffeur paused, took a slow breath, and pushed it open. Light poured in from tall, arched windows, spilling across forgotten furniture and veiled instruments. The room had once been a conservatory, its walls draped with ivy now long dead, its piano blanketed in dust, but beneath the decay was a strange kind of grace, as if time itself had been holding its breath here. Sunbeams cut through the stillness, catching the motes that danced like gold in the air. Noah stepped inside cautiously, his shoes crunching softly on the floor. "What is this place?" he whispered. "A room the world forgot," Victor said. "Maxwell never comes here." It belonged to the mansion's first owner, a woman who loved music so much she built this wing to hold concerts. But when she died, the music died too. His eyes softened as they swept the space. "Seems fitting, doesn't it, that we bring it back tonight?" In the center of the room stood a violin case atop a wooden table. It wasn't the battered one Noah practiced with. It was the gleaming instrument from Maxwell's study. The one that had drawn him like a voice calling from another lifetime. Victor approached it reverently, his fingers brushing the case's edges as though greeting an old friend. "He left it unlocked," Victor murmured, probably boasting to his guests right now about the rare Guarneri he owns. "But I doubt he even knows what he has." He unclasped the latches and the lid opened with a soft sigh. The violin inside gleamed like captured sunlight, amber wood polished to perfection, strings shining silver. For a moment both of them simply looked at it. Noah swallowed hard. "It feels alive," he whispered. Victor nodded slowly. "That's because it is. True instruments remember every hand that's ever touched them, every note ever played." He lifted it carefully, cradling it with the gentleness of someone holding a secret. "And this one remembers something very important." He turned the violin in his hands, squinting near the base of the neck. Then his expression changed, his brow furrowed, his breath caught. "Impossible," he muttered. "What is it?" Noah asked. "These markings?" Victor's voice trembled. "Look closely, just under the chin rest." He angled the violin toward the light and Noah leaned in. Faint scratches were etched into the wood, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. "I've seen this before," Victor whispered. "When I was young, I studied under a man named Master Chen. He worked briefly with the Philadelphia Orchestra in the 1960s. They used marks like these to identify instruments that toured with them. Samuel Carter once played for them, briefly before—" He trailed off, emotion thickening his words. "Before the world turned its back on him." Noah stared at the violin, his heartbeat quickening. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying," Victor said softly, "that this was your grandfather's. Somehow, through decades of greed and auctions, it ended up here, bought by a man who values money more than meaning." Noah's eyes filled with tears. His small fingers brushed the strings, and a faint hum vibrated beneath his touch, warm and familiar, as if the instrument itself recognized him. "He used to tell Mama that music never dies," Noah whispered. "It just waits for someone to find it again." Victor's voice grew steady. "Then find it. Tonight you bring it back." He placed the violin gently into Noah's hands. "But first we tune her. She's been asleep a long time." As the bow met the strings, a single note rose, pure and trembling, echoing through the empty hall. Dust stirred from the rafters as if awakened by the sound. Victor moved beside him, guiding his shoulders, correcting his stance. "Relax," he murmured. "Let the music move through you, not against you." They practiced as the hours slipped away unnoticed. Victor's low voice carried calm instruction while Noah played with growing confidence, each note steadier, fuller, truer. Outside, the sky deepened into twilight, and the first stars appeared like tiny spectators pressing their faces against the glass. At last, when the final light of day touched the violin's curve, Victor stepped back and listened. The boy's playing had changed. It carried not just sound, but something sacred, something inherited. When Noah finished, the last note hung in the air before dissolving into silence. His chest rose and fell, his eyes bright. Victor smiled, though his own eyes glistened. "Your grandfather would be proud. But remember this, Noah, tonight you don't play for Maxwell or his guests or even for me. You play for the shadow that walked so you could stand in the light." Noah nodded, clutching the violin as if it were a heartbeat he didn't want to lose. Outside, thunder rolled again, low and distant. The night was coming, and in a house built on arrogance and gold, a storm was about to rise from the strings of a forgotten soul. The mansion glowed like a palace as night fell, its many windows flickering with golden light. Chauffeured cars purred along the circular drive, their headlights slicing through the damp mist that still clung to the gardens. Inside, servants moved like clockwork, setting the stage for Maxwell Thornton's grand dinner, an event meant to impress investors, charm socialites, and remind the world that wealth could command admiration. The sound of crystal glasses clinking mixed with soft laughter, and the low hum of an orchestra hidden behind silk curtains. Everything sparkled from the silverware to Maxwell's practiced smile. In the dining room, the long mahogany table stretched endlessly under a canopy of crystal chandeliers. The guests arrived draped in satin and arrogance, their jewels catching the light as they exchanged polite gossip. The air smelled of roasted duck and expensive perfume. Maxwell stood at the head of the table, greeting each arrival with a handshake that felt like a performance. His voice, smooth and charming, disguised the cruelty that lingered behind every word. When Isabella Reynolds entered, the atmosphere shifted slightly. She carried herself with quiet confidence, her silver hair swept elegantly into a bun. Once the youngest conductor of the Metropolitan Orchestra, she had earned the respect of the elite through talent rather than inheritance. Tonight, her sharp eyes missed nothing: the subtle power plays, the forced laughter, the hollow flattery. Maxwell's gaze softened as he approached her, but she met it with polite indifference. "Isabella," he said, spreading his arms as if welcoming royalty, "you honor us with your presence." "Let's hope you honor the music too," she replied lightly, taking her seat beside a man scribbling something in a small notebook. James Harrington, the renowned classical critic. His spectacles caught the light as he looked up, giving Maxwell a nod that was neither friendly nor dismissive. Maxwell smirked. "I assure you my guests are in for something memorable this evening." Wine flowed. Conversations rose and fell in waves. Eliza darted silently between the tables, balancing trays that seemed to weigh more with each passing moment. Her face was pale, her heart pounding every time Maxwell's voice echoed across the room. She caught sight of Noah standing near the corridor entrance in clean but ill-fitting clothes, his hair neatly combed, clutching the violin case as though it were an anchor. His small frame looked fragile in the opulence surrounding him. Maxwell's eyes found them both, and his smile deepened, a predator pleased with his trap. He tapped his glass with a spoon, the clear chime cutting through laughter. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice smooth as silk. "Before dessert I have arranged a little performance, a unique display of raw, unpolished talent." He paused for effect, letting curiosity ripple through the crowd. "Our entertainment tonight will be provided by the son of one of my staff members." A murmur spread through the guests. Some turned to glance at Noah, others simply frowned. Maxwell continued, enjoying the tension he created. "The boy insists he can play the violin. I thought, why not give him a stage? After all, opportunity should be shared, should it not?" Isabella's expression hardened. "You mean to have a child perform for your amusement?" Maxwell's grin never faltered. "For art, my dear, and perhaps for humility." James looked up from his notes. "You're setting him up to fail," he said quietly. "That isn't art. It's cruelty disguised as culture." Maxwell's smile thinned. "Failure, Mr. Harrington, is an excellent teacher, and tonight we'll see if the boy can learn." The guests fell into uneasy silence, their discomfort masked by the tinkling of wine glasses and forced laughter. Even the music from the hidden orchestra faltered, as if embarrassed to play witness to what was coming. From the kitchen doorway, Eliza's hands shook as she placed a tray down too quickly, the porcelain rattling. She caught her breath, forcing herself not to cry. A young server named Maria leaned toward her and whispered, "He's been practicing, ma'am. With Mr. Victor, I heard it. It was beautiful." Eliza turned to her, disbelief and fragile hope warring in her eyes. "Victor?" "Yes, ma'am. The old driver. He's teaching him something powerful. You'll see." In that moment, something steadied inside her, though fear still clung like a shadow. Meanwhile, Maxwell raised his glass again, enjoying the captive attention. "A priceless Guarneri violin, played by an 8-year-old from the laundromat district," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "If that's not democratic art, I don't know what is." Isabella set her glass down hard enough to make it ring. "You disgust me, Maxwell," he chuckled. "I'll take that as applause." In the corridor beyond, Victor adjusted Noah's collar, his voice a quiet thread of calm. "Remember what I told you, son," he murmured. "You're not walking into their world. You're bringing your world to them. Let them listen. Noah nodded, his small hands trembling slightly as he gripped the violin case. The faint hum of voices through the door felt like a distant ocean. He could almost hear his grandfather's words echo in his memory. Music lives in our blood. Noah, don't let anyone tell you different. From the dining room came Maxwell's voice again, smooth and commanding. Ladies and gentlemen, our performer is ready. Every head turned toward the grand doors as the murmur died. The chandeliers glowed brighter, the air thick with anticipation. And in that fragile stillness before the first note, the storm that had been building inside the mansion finally prepared to break. The golden lights of the dining hall flickered against the polished crystal as laughter floated like smoke above the table, shallow and cruel. Behind the heavy double doors, just beyond that gleaming world, Noah stood in the dim corridor, clutching the violin case so tightly his knuckles turned white. Every sound from the other side, the scraping of silverware, the hum of conversation, the echo of Maxwell's commanding voice, made his stomach twist tighter. His palms were slick, his breath uneven. For a moment he thought he could feel his heartbeat in his throat. His reflection wavered in the lacquered case, a pale, frightened boy who didn't belong in any of this. He wanted to be brave, but fear was an animal gnawing at his chest. The violin felt heavy now, heavier than it ever had before, as if it carried the weight of everyone's eyes that would soon be fixed on him. He wanted to run, to disappear into the rain outside and never come back, but then he thought of his mother, her trembling hands, the soft apology in her eyes when Maxwell gave the order. He couldn't let her lose everything because of him. The corridor light flickered once, then steadied. Noah turned the brass handle of the powder room door and slipped inside, his breaths ragged. The room glowed in muted gold, the mirrors reflecting his fear back from every angle. He dropped the case on the velvet stool and sank beside it, covering his face with his hands. Hot tears broke free before he could stop them. I can't do this, he whispered into the silence. They'll laugh at me and Mama will... His voice cracked. She'll see it. He stayed like that for a long moment, trembling in the hush, until the door creaked softly open. Noah? His mother's voice, gentle, breaking a little. She stepped inside, her apron gone, replaced by a plain black dress that still bore the faint scent of flour and soap. When she saw his tears, she knelt immediately, her tired knees hitting the marble without hesitation. Oh, sweetheart, she whispered, pulling him into her arms. It's all right. You don't have to do this. We can leave right now. He shook his head, pressing his face against her shoulder. But your job. Jobs come and go, she said, though her voice trembled with the lie. You are what matters. You hear me? You. Not what he says, not what they think. You're worth more than all their gold plates and chandeliers. Noah lifted his head, searching her face. Mama, why does he hate us so much? Her eyes glistened. People like him fear what they can't understand. Your grandfather used to say that. She smiled faintly, then sighed. There's something I never told you about him. Something he made me promise to share only when the time was right. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished silver pick, the one Samuel Carter had given his grandson long ago. It glimmered faintly in the light. The night before he passed, she whispered. He told me that music didn't skip generations. It grew deeper with each one. He said that when you finally played for the world, Noah, you wouldn't be playing alone. Every silenced voice, every unheard dream would be right there with you. Noah stared at the pick, his breath catching. He really said that? She nodded. He said that your song would set them free. That it would make people remember what hearts sound like. The air felt different then. Thicker. Alive. Noah wiped his face and stood, his small frame trembling not from fear this time, but from something bigger. He took the pick and pressed it against his chest. Then I have to play, he whispered. I have to keep his promise. Eliza rose beside him, her hand lingering on his shoulder. Then play for him, sweetheart. Not for them. Not for Maxwell. For the ones who never got the chance. Outside the door, a soft knock interrupted them. It was Victor, his old eyes calm and knowing. It's time, he said. Noah turned to him, and the chauffeur's gaze met his with quiet pride. You ready, son? I think so, Noah said. His voice no longer trembled. Victor nodded. Then remember, when you walk into that room, don't see the people. See the music. It's older and truer than all of them. Eliza brushed a tear from her cheek and straightened his collar. Go make them listen. Noah lifted the violin case once more, but it no longer felt heavy. It felt like purpose. Together, they stepped into the corridor. The sound of laughter beyond the doors had faded, replaced by Maxwell's smooth, commanding tone as he announced the night's entertainment. Noah's pulse steadied. He thought of his grandfather's hands, of the music that lived in their blood waiting. He thought of the pick warm against his palm. As Victor pushed open the double doors, the golden light spilled out and Noah stepped through. The world beyond went silent for him. No voices, no clinking glasses, only the echo of his mother's whisper in his mind. Play for the silenced and let them hear. The air in the corridor was thick with the muffled hum of conversation and clinking silver. Each sound seemed to echo inside Noah's chest like the ticking of a clock, counting down to something he couldn't escape. He stood there, his small fingers tracing the edge of the violin case, feeling the tremor of his own heartbeat in his hands. The grand double doors ahead loomed taller than any he'd ever seen, carved with vines and angels that looked down like silent judges. Beyond them waited the room of polished shoes and cruel smiles, and at the head of that table, Maxwell Thornton, the man who had turned music into punishment. His throat felt dry. His shoes scuffed softly against the marble floor as he paced, the reflection of the chandelier flickering faintly on the polished stone beneath his feet. Somewhere far away, a clock struck 8. He couldn't breathe, not properly. Each inhale came shallow, heavy. He wanted to run back to the quiet corner of the conservatory, to the dusty piano and the light that felt safe. But the weight of his mother's voice lingered in his mind, gentle, fierce, unbreakable. Jobs can be replaced, you can't. She had said it with trembling conviction, but Noah knew the truth behind her words. He had seen the worry hiding in her eyes, the weight of hospital bills folded in the kitchen drawer. If he failed, she'd lose everything. He turned away from the door and ducked into the small powder room beside the hallway. Inside, the golden light glowed dimly from an ornate chandelier, reflecting 100 versions of his fear across mirrored walls. He set the violin case down on the counter, his hands trembling as he opened it. The Guarneri gleamed back at him, its honeyed surface warm in the light, its strings waiting like a voice that hadn't spoken in years. Noah stared at his reflection, trying to steady his breathing. His eyes were red and glassy, his cheeks streaked with drying tears. "I can't do it," he whispered to himself, his voice barely audible over the hum of the vent. "They'll laugh. I'll mess up and Mama..." His voice cracked. "She'll see it happen." The door creaked open behind him. He turned sharply, startled. His mother stepped in, framed by the soft light of the hallway. Her apron was gone, her hair pinned back, her face pale but strong. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "what are you doing in here?" He tried to answer, but the words tangled in his throat. When she saw the tears he'd been fighting, she crossed the room and pulled him close without hesitation. Her hands were cool against his back, her voice trembling but calm. "It's all right, baby," she whispered. "You don't have to do this. We can walk out that door right now." Noah pressed his face into her shoulder. "But your job..." "Forget my job," she said quickly, though he heard the fear beneath her strength. "You are not here to fix a cruel man's pride. None of this is your fault." Her words cracked something inside him, and the tears came harder, but when she pulled back, her eyes were shining not with fear now, but with something deeper. Memory. "There's something I never told you about your grandfather," she said quietly. "He made me promise to tell you only when you were ready. I think that time is now." She reached into her pocket and drew out a small silver pick dulled with age. The faintest engraving shimmered under the light. "He gave me this the night before he passed," she said. "He told me that when you play, you won't be playing alone. You'll carry the voices of every musician who never got the chance to be heard, every dreamer silenced, every soul who believed that beauty could outlive cruelty." Noah's small hand reached out to touch the pick. It was warm, as if it had been waiting for him.
"He really said that?"
She nodded, smiling through her tears. "He said when that moment comes, you'll feel it in your bones. You'll know the song isn't yours, it's theirs. You just have to open the door and let it out." Noah looked down at the violin. It didn't feel like an object anymore. It felt alive, familiar. He could almost hear the whisper of his grandfather's bow sliding across the strings, the heartbeat rhythm of his own blood calling back. He lifted the violin gently, holding it against his shoulder just to feel its weight. Outside, Victor's voice echoed softly from the corridor. "It's time, son." Eliza brushed her hand through Noah's curls, straightened his collar, and forced a trembling smile. "Go," she whispered. "And remember, you're not here to entertain them. You're here to remind them what real music sounds like." Noah nodded, his fear reshaping into something fiercer, quieter. Purpose. He lifted the violin case, his reflection catching in the mirror one last time. The boy who had walked into this mansion that morning was gone. In his place stood something older than fear, something born from the quiet ache of generations. When he opened the powder room door, the golden hallway seemed brighter. The laughter from the dining room dulled to a low hum, and Maxwell's voice rang out, announcing his special entertainment. Noah took a breath, the silver pick pressed against his palm. The doors ahead gleamed under the chandelier light. With one steady step, then another, he moved toward them, ready to let the music speak for every soul that ever lived in the shadows. The moment Noah stepped into the dining room, the world seemed to shrink and expand all at once. The grand chandeliers poured golden light over a sea of faces. Men in tailored suits, women draped in jewels that shimmered like stars, all watching him with varying degrees of curiosity and amusement. The air smelled of roasted duck perfume and arrogance. The clinking of glasses faded as Maxwell Thornton rose from his chair, his shadow stretching long across the marble floor like a curtain drawn over innocence. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maxwell said, his voice smooth as glass, sharp as a blade. "Tonight we are treated to something extraordinary. The son of my household staff believes he can entertain our refined company with the violin." His lips curled in a mock smile as he gestured toward Noah. "A prodigy from the servants' quarters, if you will. Let's see if talent really can come from anywhere." Laughter rippled softly through the room, nervous in some corners, cruel in others. Noah's fingers tightened on the violin case. He could feel his mother's eyes from the doorway behind the servants' corridor. Her breath held, her heart breaking. Victor stood beside her, his face calm but his eyes burning with quiet pride. Noah swallowed hard, his pulse a drumbeat in his ears. He walked toward the center of the room, each step echoing against the marble, impossibly loud. The guests leaned forward in their seats, the kind of audience that came not to be moved but to witness a fall. Maxwell sat back down, his smirk widening as if the boy's trembling hands had already confirmed his victory. Noah set the case down on the carpet and opened it carefully. The Guarneri gleamed under the chandelier's light, its golden body catching reflections like fire. There were gasps, real ones this time, from guests who recognized the priceless craftsmanship. Isabella Reynolds leaned forward, her conductor's instincts sharpening. She could see something in the boy's careful touch, the reverence with which he lifted the violin. It wasn't fear, it was connection. Noah placed the violin under his chin, the familiar curve fitting perfectly against his neck, as though it had been waiting for him all along. The bow hovered over the strings. Silence blanketed the room. Maxwell's smirk deepened. The boy looked too fragile, too small to command an audience like this. The humiliation would be exquisite. Then the first note rang out. It was soft, tentative, trembling at first like the uncertain voice of a bird testing its wings. A few guests exchanged smirks, confirming their expectations, but then the sound deepened, grew transformed. The violin's tone filled the space, warm and alive, weaving through the air like light through water. Noah closed his eyes, the fear melting away as his grandfather's words echoed in his mind. "Music lives in our blood, Noah. Don't let anyone tell you different." He played the opening bars of Massenet's Meditation, his bow moving with surprising grace. Each note shimmered, delicate but precise, carrying emotion too big for someone so young. The room began to change. Conversations died mid-whisper. Forks paused halfway to mouths. The chandelier lights seemed to hum with the resonance of the violin, their crystals vibrating faintly as if listening. Maxwell's smile faltered. The sound wasn't what he'd expected. It wasn't childish or clumsy, it was beautiful. Achingly, hauntingly beautiful. Noah didn't see the crowd anymore. He saw a dimly lit club decades ago, smoke curling around his grandfather's silhouette as he played to an audience that never knew his name. He saw his mother standing by the kitchen door, whispering to herself that one day his music would change everything. He saw Victor's hands guiding his posture, his voice saying, "Play for the truth, not the approval." The notes swelled, pure and unrestrained. They carried heartbreak, hope, defiance, everything the boy had never found words for. A woman near the center of the table wiped tears from her eyes. Isabella leaned forward, hands clasped against her chest, her breathing shallow. James Harrington, the critic, blinked hard, realizing he'd stopped writing mid-sentence. Maxwell's jaw clenched, the veins at his temple pulsing. The longer the boy played, the smaller he felt. The violin, his violin, had never sung like this for him. It was as if the boy had unlocked something ancient, something that refused to be owned. When Noah reached the crescendo, the music rose and broke like a wave, cascading over the guests with raw power. The final note lingered in the air, trembling before dissolving into silence so thick it felt sacred. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the room erupted. Applause thundered through the hall. Isabella rose to her feet, tears glistening on her cheeks. James Harrington clapped until his palms stung, his mind already racing with the headline of a lifetime. Even the cynical guests who had come for spectacle found themselves on their feet, swept into something they didn't understand but couldn't deny. Maxwell remained seated, pale, frozen, the applause crashing around him like a storm. His humiliation was complete, though no one laughed now. The power he'd used to belittle others had been stolen back by the music that filled the very walls of his home. Noah stood there, breathless, the violin still trembling in his hands. He didn't smile, didn't bow. He only whispered softly under the roar of clapping hands. His voice carried on the last ghost of sound in the air. "That was for you, grandfather." For several seconds after the last note faded, silence ruled the room. It wasn't the silence of polite restraint. It was the kind that happens when something too beautiful to name lingers in the air, and no one dares breathe for fear of breaking it. The chandeliers above shimmered softly, their reflections trembling across crystal glasses and white tablecloths like the afterglow of a dream. Noah stood at the center of it all, the violin still cradled in his hands, the bow hanging loose, his small chest rising and falling with quiet exhaustion. His eyes were open now but unfocused, as though he was somewhere else entirely, still lost in the world he'd created through sound. The spell broke with the sharp scrape of a chair. Isabella Reynolds, her silver hair gleaming under the light, rose first. Her applause rang out clear and fierce like thunder rolling through the marble hall. The others followed in waves, first a few, then the entire room, clapping, shouting, some even standing. The applause filled the space that moments ago had been thick with mockery. What had begun as a setup for humiliation had become a moment of revelation. Eliza pressed both hands to her mouth, tears spilling freely down her cheeks. She stood frozen in the doorway, her heart caught between disbelief and pride so overwhelming it hurt to breathe. Beside her, Victor's eyes glistened with quiet triumph. He nodded to himself as if to say, "The shadow finally plays in the light." Noah blinked, disoriented by the roar of approval. He had imagined silence, maybe laughter, but not this. Not the warmth washing over him like sunlight after years of cold. Isabella was already crossing the room toward him, her movements quick and certain. She stopped just in front of him and knelt to meet his gaze. "Where did you learn to play like that?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. "My grandfather taught me," Noah said, his small voice carrying through the hush that had settled again. "He said music lives in our blood." Something flickered in Isabella's expression, recognition, respect, maybe awe. Behind her, James Harrington, the critic, was frantically typing notes into his phone, his face flushed with excitement. "I've reviewed concert halls from Paris to New York," he murmured, "but I've never heard something like this come from a child." Maxwell Thornton still hadn't moved. His hands gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles white, his face drained of color. The applause seemed to strike him like a physical blow, each clap a reminder of how wrong he'd been. He had orchestrated a humiliation. Instead, he had witnessed his own undoing. When Isabella turned to him, her voice carried the weight of fury and grace. "You called this child a servant's son," she said coldly. "What I heard tonight was not servitude, it was genius." Maxwell's mouth twitched, but no words came out. He looked around the room for support and found only disapproving eyes. Guests who had once courted his favor now looked at him with disgust. Dr. Patricia Westbrook, the philanthropist seated near the head of the table, pushed back her chair with deliberate force. "I came here to discuss art and charity," she said, her voice crisp and cutting. "What I witnessed was cruelty disguised as culture. Mr. Thornton, you should be ashamed." "Now wait." Maxwell began, but she cut him off with a raised hand. No, she said. You waited for a child to fail so you could laugh. But instead you watched him prove that talent and dignity don't bow to wealth. Murmurs spread like wildfire across the table. One by one, guests began to stand, some clapping again, some shaking their heads in quiet outrage. Maxwell's empire of charm, built on intimidation and pretense, began to crack right there in his own dining hall. James Harrington slipped his phone into his jacket pocket. You'll be reading about this in the Times, he said coolly. The world deserves to know what happened here and who made it happen. No, Maxwell snapped, standing so suddenly his chair toppled behind him. This was a misunderstanding. A dinner game. You're overreacting. But his words drowned beneath another wave of applause. This one meant not for him, but for the small boy who had unknowingly turned a gilded cage into a concert hall. Isabella placed her hand gently on Noah's shoulder. You've done something extraordinary tonight, young man, she said warmly. How would you like to study with us at Westfield Academy? Properly, with real instruction? Noah's eyes widened. I could go to a music school. You deserve nothing less, she replied. Eliza covered her mouth, unable to speak. Victor stood straighter, pride glowing through the years of quiet labor that had dulled his spirit. The servant, the maid, the orphaned Prodigy, each of them had stepped beyond their assigned place in the world, lifted by the truth of a single performance. Maxwell, meanwhile, stood amidst the ruin of his own making, surrounded by the fading applause that no longer belonged to him. His guests were leaving, their laughter no longer polite but pointed. He reached for his wineglass, but his hand trembled too much to lift it. As Noah turned toward his mother, the violin still cradled in his arms, he smiled shyly through tears. Mama, he whispered, I think grandfather heard me. And for the first time in her life, Eliza believed that maybe heaven wasn't somewhere far away. It was right here, echoing in every note her son had just played. 3 weeks passed since that unforgettable night in the Thornton mansion, but for Eliza and Noah, it felt like a lifetime had unfolded in those days. The cold marble halls, the cruel laughter, and Maxwell's smirk had become distant ghosts replaced by the quiet hum of possibility. Morning light now streamed through a very different set of windows. Tall, sun-dappled panes overlooking the courtyard of the Westfield Academy of Music. Noah sat at a polished mahogany desk in a classroom that smelled of varnished wood and rosin, his legs swinging just above the floor as he listened to the soft, melodic hum of his new teacher tuning a violin. Isabella Reynolds had kept her promise. She'd not only secured Noah's full scholarship, but arranged something far beyond what Eliza had ever dreamed of. The academy had provided a small apartment on campus for them both, furnished with sunlight and peace, two things Eliza hadn't known for years. From the window, she often watched Noah walk across the cobblestone courtyard each morning, violin case in hand, his shoulders straight and his steps sure. Gone was the timid child who used to flinch at raised voices or shrink before polished shoes. In his place stood a boy who carried music like a flame, careful but unafraid to let it burn bright. Inside the rehearsal room, Victor stood beside Isabella, his uniform replaced by a tailored suit. His hands, still steady despite the years, rested proudly behind his back as he watched Noah play through scales. The touch of a natural, Victor murmured. He listens with his whole body. Isabella smiled. He feels what others only hear. That cannot be taught. When Noah finished, his bow stilling on the strings, Isabella clapped softly. Beautiful. You're improving faster than I expected, young man. Noah smiled shyly. I just remember what Mr. Victor told me, to let the music talk. Victor chuckled, his eyes twinkling. And it seems it has plenty to say. Outside that room, Eliza sat on a bench beneath a budding oak tree, a stack of forms on her lap. The academy had offered her a full-time position assisting the administration, complete with benefits. Her hands no longer ached from scrubbing floors. Her heart no longer carried the weight of humiliation or fear. For the first time in her life, stability didn't feel like a dream. It felt like a home. Still, every now and then, the memory of Maxwell's laughter flickered at the edge of her mind. That night had scarred something deep in her, but it had also awakened a quiet strength. When the article from the Times hit the papers, Servant Son stuns elite dinner crowd with genius performance, it spread faster than any rumor ever had. Reporters tried to reach them, offers flooded in, but Isabella shielded them with the firmness of a mother lion. "He's a child, not a headline," she'd said. "He will grow first, then the world can come knocking." Meanwhile, across town, Maxwell Thornton's empire was unraveling thread by thread. The same paper that had celebrated Noah now printed follow-ups about labor investigations, unpaid staff, and manipulative contracts. Old employees had found courage in the scandal to tell their stories. Business partners withdrew their deals, and invitations to high society gatherings stopped coming. In one of those stories, a quote from Victor surfaced anonymously. "When you try to crush light, it finds another window to shine through." The word stung Maxwell more than any lawsuit ever could. His mansion felt emptier with each passing day. A monument to pride turned into a prison of silence. The Guarneri violin, the very one Noah had awakened that night, had been sold to pay for his legal defense. When the instrument left his home in a velvet-lined case, carried by auctioneers with gloved hands, Maxwell felt as though the last piece of his power had gone with it. One rainy afternoon, Victor visited the mansion for the last time. Maxwell sat in his study, staring at the ghostly outline of where the violin once rested. "She's gone," Maxwell said quietly, not turning around. Victor's gaze softened. "It was never yours to keep." Maxwell looked up, his eyes bloodshot, his voice hollow. "I don't understand how that boy did it. How he made them all listen." Victor stepped forward, his old shoes soundless on the rug. "Because he wasn't trying to be heard," he said. He was trying to say something true. For a long moment, the two men said nothing. Then Victor turned to leave, pausing at the doorway. "You could have shared in something beautiful that night, Maxwell. But you chose to mock it. That's why you lost everything that mattered." When he closed the door behind him, the mansion fell into silence again, a silence Maxwell could no longer bear. Across the city, laughter filled the academy halls. Noah was in the practice room, his bow dancing, his music echoing through the corridors like sunlight after a storm. Eliza listened from the doorway, her eyes wet, her smile unshakable. Her son had done the impossible. He had turned humiliation into harmony, cruelty into creation. And though the world now knew his name, she knew the truth behind every note. He wasn't playing for fame or applause. He was still playing for his grandfather, for every silenced soul, and for the promise that music, once born of pain, could become something that healed the world. The spring wind carried the scent of rain and lilac through the courtyard of Westfield Academy, as families and faculty filled the concert hall. The evening shimmered with expectation, the kind that hums quietly before something unforgettable begins. Banners of gold and ivory framed the stage, their soft folds catching the light. On the program, printed in elegant script, one name stood out: Noah Carter. Age 9 backstage, Noah stood before a tall mirror, dressed in a crisp white shirt and a black bow tie that his mother had tied herself. The boy who once trembled outside a Billionaire's dining room now stood calm, composed, a quiet confidence in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He adjusted the violin in his hands, the same violin his grandfather had once held, restored and returned to its glory by Isabella's efforts. When he touched its smooth surface, it felt warm, alive, as if the instrument remembered the journey that had brought it home. Eliza appeared beside him, radiant in a soft blue dress that brought color back to her cheeks. The lines of worry that had once framed her face had softened into something lighter: peace, pride, gratitude. She brushed a stray curl from his forehead and smiled. "You ready, sweetheart?" He nodded. "I'm ready, Mama. I think Grandfather's ready, too." Her eyes glistened, but she laughed softly. "Then don't keep him waiting." Victor approached, dignified in his professor's suit, a man reborn through the music he had once feared lost. "You remember what I told you, Noah?" Noah smiled. "Don't play for perfection, play for truth." Victor's eyes shone. "Exactly. Tonight, you're not just performing. You're giving back what the world tried to take from your family. Let it be heard." From the stage came Isabella's gentle voice announcing the final performance of the evening. The audience quieted instantly, the kind of hush that feels sacred. As Noah stepped into the light, the hall seemed to hold its breath. Hundreds of faces turned toward him, but he didn't see the crowd. He saw his mother in the front row, hands clasped. He saw Victor standing tall, pride shining through his calm demeanor. He saw the photograph of Samuel Carter in his mind, the shadow who had played in dim clubs, never in concert halls. Noah raised the violin to his chin. The bow trembled once in his small hand before he drew the first note. The sound rose pure and golden, spreading through the hall like morning sunlight through stained glass. Each note of Massenet's meditation carried years of silence, loss, and love reborn. The audience leaned forward as if the music itself had gravity. The child's body swayed with each phrase, his eyes closed, his expression serene. He wasn't merely playing, he was conversing with the past, with every forgotten musician who had been denied a stage. The violin wept, then sang, then soared. Its voice filled the rafters and echoed across generations. Some people in the crowd wept quietly. Isabella pressed a hand to her chest, recognizing not just talent but truth. The music transcended skill. It carried something ancient and human, something no amount of wealth or power could counterfeit. At the very back of the hall, unnoticed by most, a man in a janitor's uniform paused with his broom. Maxwell Thornton stood there, thinner, older, his once perfect posture slightly bent. He had come to see for himself, though he didn't fully understand why. As the music wrapped around him, something inside his chest cracked open, the same place where pride had once built its walls. His eyes blurred as the melody climbed higher, the same melody that had once silenced his dinner guests and ended his reign of arrogance. Now it washed over him like forgiveness. Noah's final note lingered, hovering in the air before dissolving into silence. For one heartbeat, no one moved. Then applause erupted, thunderous, unstoppable, a storm of love and awe. The boy bowed, but his gaze drifted to the shadows at the back, where Maxwell stood unmoving, his eyes wet with something raw and real. Later that night, after the crowd had gone and the last echoes of applause faded into the corridors, Noah, Eliza, and Victor walked together beneath the glowing lamps of the academy courtyard. The night was quiet except for the rustle of leaves. They carried a small bouquet of lilies and the silver pick Samuel had given them years ago. Their steps led them to Riverside Cemetery, where the new headstone gleamed under moonlight. Samuel the Shadow Carter, the music lives. Noah knelt beside it, setting the flowers down. "We did it, grandfather," he whispered, his voice steady. "They heard you tonight." He lifted the violin and began to play a slow, tender melody, soft enough for the stars to listen. The notes floated through the air, delicate as a prayer. Eliza closed her eyes, feeling the breeze brush her face, and for a moment she could swear she heard another violin, faint and distant, harmonizing with her son's. When Noah lowered the bow, the night felt lighter, as though the world had exhaled. Far away, in the city's quiet streets, Maxwell walked alone. He paused outside a closed music shop and looked at the instruments displayed behind the glass. For the first time, he didn't see possessions. He saw voices, silent, waiting to be heard. Back in the cemetery, Noah whispered, "Good night, grandfather." A gentle wind stirred the grass, carrying with it the faintest echo of strings. It sounded like gratitude. It sounded like peace. And as the boy's laughter joined the wind, the music lived on, bright and unbroken, no longer hidden in the shadows, but finally free in the light.